Let's all laugh. That was just, you shouldn't say, you shouldn't have said that about Amanda. That's terrible. Sorry. Oh my Lord. Okay. Are we ready to go? We are going to finish up Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And I was saying, and I'll say it here too, that for your art project next week, you don't have to only talk about Voyage of the Dawn Treader. You can go back and do anything from Lion the Witch or Prince Caspian or this. And I mean, if you know the other ones, you can bring it in. But also, if you want to focus your next art presentation on all the stuff I showed you about the spheres and the influences, feel free to do that. And that could be a really neat thing to work out if you want. In fact, if you do something like that and you send it to me as like a PDF, I can always send it on to Michael Ward, if you want, like the guy who wrote the book, and I'm sure he'll be excited. Maybe he'll send you some kudos. I don't know. But anyway, so all right, let's dive in here. We ended last class by looking at the undragoning of Eustace, right? So let's jump on right ahead now. And I did have my big mark here, and I've already.
We'd like to thank you for the extra credit, Dr. Marcos.
Oh, what was the extra credit?
For being here in class.
Oh, there we go. See?
They don't get that at home.
Oh, they don't get that at home? But Amanda's coming, okay? Now, we're basically talking about Anthony here, is that?
That's exactly. Anthony's not getting the extra credit that we are.
Woo! You know, Anthony, I was watching some specials this weekend about the time of Beowulf and all, and you know, by the time you get to like Alfred the Great, they're using crowns. But the earlier Saxon kings, instead of putting on a crown, they put on a helmet, like Beowulf. So I don't know if that factors into Anthony, but I'm thinking that'd be cool. Of course, we're not doing that in this class, but you can bring it in somewhere else. Okay, before we get to the magician's book, which is so much fun, let's just turn to page, let me see what page it is. Where's my number? 1 second. Here it is, page 484. This is when they go to Goldwater Island. So this is the end of chapter 8. So on page 484. And if this was the first time you were reading it, how long did it take you to figure out what was going on? That whatever touches the water turns to gold, right? And at first they think there's a statue under the water, but did you understand what it was?
When he dropped the staff, I did.
Yeah, when he dropped the staff, it's like, oh my gosh, if I put my foot in there, my toe would have turned gold, right? And it turns out that gold statue at the bottom, do you understand what that is? Exactly, it's one of those 7 lords who dove in to take a nice swim and boom, immediately was turned to gold. Ooh. All that touch about the Midas touch, right? And how that becomes a curse, right? Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right. Remember he kills the girl? He paints her completely with gold paint and she dies. Goldfinger. But the Shirley Bassey, she's a good singer. Remember her? Yeah. She also sang Diamonds Are Forever, which is a good one too. And but here, remember, the solar influence is gold. And usually gold can be good if it's kingly and glorious. But if you receive the influence poorly, then you can end up with the terrible greed that ends up causing, strife and civil war and murdering your kin and things like that. And what happens is that they start, the 2 boys, basically, Caspian and Edmund, start getting gold fever, if you want to think about The Hobbit, like Thorin Oakenshield gets. They start getting gold fever, and they want it, and they're fighting back and forth, and it looks like the 2 may kill each other, and then Lucy cries out, and this would basically be Paula crying out against the guys who are doing crazy things. "Oh, stop it, both of you," said Lucy. This is 484. "That's the worst of doing anything with boys. You're all such swaggering, bullying idiots." Oh! Her voice died away into a gasp, and everyone else saw what she had seen. What did she see? Across the gray hillside above them, gray, for the heather was not yet in bloom, without noise and without looking at them, and shining as if he were in bright sunlight, though the sun had in fact set, gone in, passed with slow pace the hugest line that human eyes have ever seen. In describing the scene, Lucy said afterwards, he was the size of an elephant, though at another time she only said the size of a cart horse. But it was not the size that mattered. Nobody dared to ask what it was. They knew it was Aslan. And nobody ever saw how or where he went. They looked at one another like people waking from sleep. "What were we talking about?" said Caspian. "Have I been making rather an ass of myself?" Sire, this is a place with a curse on it. Let us get back on board at once. And off they take. So, notice that the first time we saw Aslan in the undragoning of Eustace, do you remember what was shining on him? Though there wasn't any that night. Yeah, the moon, right? Now we said this is the solar book, but notice that the first time they see him, it's more faint and it's the moon, which is, after all, a reflection of sunlight. But now, even though the sun has gone down and set, he's becoming more and more solar as we go along, right? And he appears, and I said this before, a good place to talk about it now is, I would argue that in some ways, in this book, Aslan is almost more like the Holy Spirit than like Jesus, like he is particularly in Lord of the Rings. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. What do you think? How is he maybe more like the Holy Spirit? You had emailed me some thoughts about that a while back, Paula.
Well, I thought he, especially now after reading this, he's more like the Holy Spirit because he's showing up when he's most needed, when he's as a direction person. And they're finally catching on. If you see him, you better leave and head towards him because trouble awaits. And so they just talked about that again.
Good.
And so even back in Prince Caspian, when they were, going through the mountains, Peter didn't want to go a certain way, and Lucy kept, talking about again, following where Aslan was telling her to go, and they wouldn't listen. They lost a day or two of travel, and so in that way, I guess he's more like the Holy Spirit because he's there as a force, but not in physical presence.
Good, kind of guides us, right? Good, send signs. Good.
Or whatever he's sending out.
And oftentimes, if you're about to do something wrong, the Holy Spirit may what? You know the fancy word we use? What might the Holy Spirit do to us if we're going to do something wrong? It starts with a C. I wonder if you know this. Like your conscience. And the word we use is convict you. Have you ever heard that word? Conviction. It's like the Holy Spirit sort of, kind of nudging you in the heart saying, maybe this is not the best thing to do, okay? Maybe be nice to Amanda. That might be what the Holy Spirit's saying. That's what he's saying right now. Be nice, right? But you're right, the Holy Spirit is often more sort of a guide on the way, right? And the Holy Spirit is often depicted in what shape in the Bible? What animal shape do we sometimes? As a dove. And later on we'll see him, not as a dove, but as a bird, a little bit later, leading them out of the dark place, that dark island, scary place. Right? But here again, he needs to show up and give them, because again, that's what the sort of spiritual pilgrimage is. It's not always big things, but it's little challenges, one at a time. And are we going to follow, or are we going to go off course? They're little tests. That's a good way to put it. And we said before, and actually you noticed this, that there's no actual villain in this book. This is the only book that doesn't have a clear villain, right? It's funny, a few books have witches, other ones have like usurpers and evil folks and stuff, and they're all different ones, but this one doesn't, because sometimes life doesn't really have one villain. Wouldn't it be nice if all the trouble in the world was based on one person? Okay. Well, half the country thinks that person is Trump, and 4 years ago they thought it was Obama. But you can't blame everything on one person, okay? I mean, it's unbelievable. I don't know what's happened to Americans. We want an easy excuse for everything that's wrong in our lives. It's more complicated than that, and often it's a series of little tests, right? So Aslan passes by, and everything changes. Ooh. But now let's get to, I think, one of the most incredible things that C.S. Lewis does. And you can jump all the way ahead to page, let's see, here it is, to page 495. That's the chapter called The Magician's Book. It's chapter 10. About a third to half of the way into The Magician's Book. Now let's set this up. And again, if this was the first time you were reading this, what did you think those things were going to turn out to be that kept jumping and bouncing and all that stuff? I was afraid they were going to be like some giant, insect or something like that, or something scary, right? And they're called the Dufflepuds, or the Duffers. And they are monopods. They're dwarves, but they only have one big foot, right, that they hop around on. And Lewis had read all those old medieval romances where people would, encounter strange, animals and forces and things like that. And he's playing on a lot of those voyage narratives that people wrote, way back in the Middle Ages, even before. Go ahead.
I couldn't help but laugh whenever he says, unfortunately, they would be known as that for thousands of years.
Oh, these poor guys, that's right, they're stuck now. The duffers, or the duffel pods, or I guess you can call them the monopods, right? And it's wonderful, because when she first sees them, she thinks they're giant mushrooms, right? Because they've got that big stalk, and they can go on the water and sail along on their little thing. Maybe these are the first skateboard people, Oh, man, the skateboarders. You remember that guy, Choice, in our class? The guy from Nigeria, he was always on the skateboard everywhere. It's hysterical. He is a good guy. I miss him. He's graduated now. Or no, he's graduating in December, but he's almost done. Oh, by the way, you can tell your friends, I don't know if you saw this, but HBU is going to have a graduation ceremony for the people that were supposed to graduate in May or August. And it's going to be on the field, not on the, but in the big field, the Husky Field, whatever it's called, the thing. And they just told us it's going to be in November. It's November 13th and 14th. It looks like, I think. But that's what's supposed to be our homecoming. Usually, I don't think we're going to have a homecoming. I don't know what we're going to do. But so people will have an option to actually graduate there. But hopefully, you all, except Chris, will be able to graduate in May normally. Let's hope. And by the time Chris is ready to graduate, either the world will be just gone or everything will be fine. Either we'll just all be dead or something. Yeah, it's. Just remember that, the real Black Death killed a third of the population, sometimes half the population of cities. It's just unbelievable to even think about. Anyway, okay. So, what happens is they're invisible, and they capture them, and Reaper Chief, of course, wants to fight. They have to calm them down, right? And they say, what you need to do is send the little girl here, Lucy, to go find the magician's book and read the spell, right? And they do a nice job with the book in the movie. Although they change things, as I'll show you. But she goes there, and it's a wonderful magic book, and it's one of these books that, as you look at it, it starts to move, right? And it's almost like a 3D effect, and it's cool. You got to invent something like that. That'd be cool. Make your art actually move and stuff like that. That'd be cool. You can do it all. You can do it all. Anyway, so she starts looking into it, and on page 495, she reads. It's in italics. An infallible an infallible spell to make beautiful. I can tell that I'm stuffed up because when I use my little, dictaphone on my phone, it keeps making all these mistakes. It's because I'm stuffed up and it's messing up consonants.
Marcos, are you looking for something to blame?
Oh, there we go. So I'm getting there. I'm getting there. But an infallible spell to make beautiful her that uttereth beyond the lot of mortals, right? And as she looks at the pictures, suddenly she becomes beautiful, more beautiful than who? Her sister, who was always the beautiful one, right? And suddenly she looks beautiful. And I love what it says. It's the next page. It's still page 495 towards the bottom. She saw herself throned on high as a great tournament in Calormen, and all the kings of the world fought because of her beauty. After that, it turned from tournaments to real wars, and all Narnia and Arkenland, Telmar and Calormen, Galma and Terebinthia were laid waste with the fury of the kings and dukes and great lords who fought for her favor. If she says this spell, she'll become like what? Can you name a woman in legend who would be like this? Who caused a war? Who caused the Trojan War? Helen of Troy. Or in medieval, what medieval queen caused a sort of civil war and breakdown because she was unfaithful to her husband?
The one who was with Arthur.
Good. All right, Guinevere, the one who ran off with Lancelot, right? So Guinevere. And I think he's got both those images in mind. Helen, but the medieval setting with tournaments, right? A tournament is like when you have a joust. Right? So, are any of you going to be brave and go to the Renaissance Festival?
I was just about to bring that up.
Are you going to do it?
No.
It's open this past weekend.
Yeah. Somebody said they went. They said it was very safe until people were like in the pub. They were there. Then they're all taking their masks off. They're all drinking. They're all close. They said generally it was good. Hey, Landon.
Montgomery
What
County
is-
is
yeah, watch out.
Massachusetts. I mean,
That's
all
right.
the bars are open there. I mean,
Yeah, oh, yeah,
they're
that's
not
true.
doing anything that's not already being done.
Oh,
in
see?
Montgomery County. I mean, they've
That's
got-
right. She's right. All the bars and little.
All that
yeah,
stuff's
They're
open.
still open.
Yeah.
Little
They
biker
haven't,
bars.
yeah.
Wow.
That's what I mean.
So I don't know. So I think I'm going to skip it this year, but next year we'll be back. I hope.
So
Right?
the word is, my stepdad is friends with King George, the guy
Oh,
who
you
runs
went.
the place.
Oh,
The word on the street or the woods is that.
good.
The word of the woods is,
That they're gonna open for 2 weeks and say that someone has COVID, so they can close and get the government
You get some cash.
to get some cash back.
Oh, really? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So that's like in discussion secretly.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Man, that's cruel. Don't we better get their fans upset by doing
I
that
know.
because they've got diehard fans for years.
Vendors and everybody, you've already missed
That's right,
out.
they would be upset,
Rodeo
yeah.
and a bunch of other stuff, yeah.
That's a livelihood for a lot of people. They can go from town to town.
Yeah, you're right. Most of those people with booths go from one Red Fest to another all around the country. That's true because there's Scarborough Fair. There's all different ones at different times. Wild. What a way to live.
I
Anyway.
mean, the odds of like somebody just showing up there and having COVID is pretty high. People coming from all over.
Yeah, that's true. It's got to be pretty high.
Like if it's
They
within the
probably
same.
don't do a temperature thing at the gate.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think that's enough for them to like say that they got a case is that somebody comes to the gate and.
Yeah.
Man, it's
Huzzah!
huzzah! That's right. Huzzah! Huzzah! I'm missing it already. It's great stuff. Anyway, so we're at the bottom of page 495. Amanda, we're looking at the magician's book where Lucy is tempted to read the spell that will make her, infallibly beautiful more than any other mortal, right? And she's seeing what would happen if she says the spell, right? Suddenly everyone's fighting over here. They're starting a war. And then it says, then it changed, and Lucy, why? That's pretty cool.
this dude. I hope to take 10 points off of his grade right now.
Clinton has a version of my father's ploy. It took me a long time to realize what my father was doing. Every time we have a big party with the family, he always decides to choose someone and point everyone's attention to how much Lupe is eating. Because he's the one that's eating the most. But it took me a while to understand when he was looking at a diversionary tactic. Hey, what are you looking at? And then one time he was hungry and he wanted the food, and my mother didn't have the food ready, and he didn't want to say, get the food ready, so he said, Angie, look, Uncle Tom just passed out from hunger. Things like that. It's hysterical. So anyway, he knows it, man. Evasive maneuvers, Mr. Sulu, right there. Anyway, so then it changed, and Lucy, still beautiful beyond the lot of mortals, was back in England, and Susan, who had always been the beauty of the family, came home from America. The Susan in the picture looked exactly like the real Susan, only plainer and with a nasty expression. And Susan was jealous of the dazzling beauty of Lucy, but that didn't matter a bit, because no one cared anything about Susan now. So you're playing on somebody's vanity, but also kind of their envy at the same time. And notice that the White Witch did that to Edmund in the first novel. I don't know if you remember that, but Edmund says, oh, there's nothing special about them, And again, playing on that. And it says, now watch, because this is an unbelievable spiritual insight. It says, I will say the spell, said Lucy. I don't care, I will. And then C.S. Lewis comments, she said, I don't care, because she had a strong feeling that she mustn't. What is C.S. Lewis understanding about sort of human psychology, or whether it's a kid or an adult? It's like she's saying, I don't care, super loudly. Why?
So someone will point it out.
Okay, good. And then maybe she's like trying to convince herself.
Yeah.
Or sometimes, aren't we almost trying to, what's the word I want, sort of dampen down our conscience? We insist. There's a phrase, it actually goes back to Hamlet. The lady doth protest too much. The lady that keeps protesting, I only care about my husband, I only care about she protests a little too much, you know? You've heard that phrase. And
Yes, sir.
and in a sense, that's what's happening. See, and I mean, we've already seen this. I guess I don't know if I said it quite specifically, but remember when Aslan has that conversation with Lucy and Prince Caspian after she doesn't follow him. And notice that Aslan doesn't tell her what's wrong right away. When Lucy says, yeah, isn't it terrible? I was going to come, but the others didn't want to. And then he just kind of growls. Oh, I didn't mean to slang the others. I mean, you know, and Aslan doesn't say anything. He forces her to realize and understand exactly what she did wrong, and also to understand that she didn't have to do the wrong thing. In other words, it's not like, oh, I was fooled. Actually, we knew what we were doing. Right? And we're protesting even harder that we didn't know what we were doing, because we know deep down that we knew what we were doing. All of these ways. And Lewis understood that, you know, kids are human beings too. They're all, you know, sons of Adam and daughters of Eve, which is a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because it means we're fallen. And so we protest even more. She says, I don't care, because deep down she knows that she should care. So again, C.S. Lewis doesn't let them get off the hook easy. Aslan gives forgiveness, but you first have to understand what you did wrong and how you can avoid it next time. So it's not just, it's grace, but it's not sort of a cheap grace. You realize, you need to realize what you did wrong, or you're just going to fall into the same thing over and over again. So he really treats his kid as adults in that sense, by I like to call it a sort of catechism, a question and answer until we realize, and we're going to see just in a moment what Aslan does it for her. Okay, now she goes on, and she is about to say the spell when the face of Aslan appears in the book and roars. And she turns the page. Now, she comes up a little bit later upon a spell. It says this, a little later, we're still on page 486, next paragraph. A little later, she came to a spell which would let you know what your friends thought about you. Bad spell, right? Don't do it. God knew what he did in not giving us the power to literally read other people's minds. Oh, we'd probably all hate each other. Now Lucy had wanted very badly to try the other spell, the one that made you beautiful beyond the lot of mortals. So she felt that to make up for not having said it, she really would say this one. See the justification? It's wrong, but, well, I didn't say the other one, so I could do this. Right? And all in a hurry, for fear her mind would change, she said the words, nothing will induce me to tell you what they were. Why does she say it faster? You recognize how we do these things? So it's done, right? I want to, again, sort of do an end run. Is that the word in football? I want to do an end run around my conscience and go fast. So I know I shouldn't eat this, so I eat it quickly before I change my mind. Again, all of these things. Lewis, and if you like this about Lewis, read a book called The Screwtape Letters, where a senior devil teaches a junior devil how to tempt people. It's got that same incredible psychological insight. I call it the psychology of sin, the way we can justify anything. So she says it in a hurry. She does it impulsively, so her conscience won't stop her. And all of a sudden, she sees one of her friends from back school, and they're like in a carriage together, going down. And, what's that?
Oh, no, I was just reading.
Oh, you were reading?
No, I was just reading.
Oh, it's really cool. And what happens, okay, there's the friend of Lucy, and then there's a bully. Right? And what does the bully start doing to Lucy's friend? Understand what's going on here? This happens all the time. He says, shall I see anything of you this term? Or are you still going to be all taken up with Lucy Pevensey? That's what the bully says. Don't know what you mean by taken up. Oh, yes, you do. You were crazy about her last term. Now, no, I wasn't. I've got more sense than that. Not a bad little kid in a way, but I was getting pretty tired of her before the end of term. Now, that's not really the way Marjorie feels. She's actually friends with Lucy. But why does she say that? It's human nature. Exactly, right? To fit in. What, Mean Girls? Is that the movie Mean Girls? Right? And all of us probably have fallen prey to that at least one time. We call that peer pressure, right? Giving into peer pressure, but it's really more what Paul said. It's wanting to fit in and look tougher. So we put down somebody that we really like, but we want to impress the bully, right? And of course, when Lucy hears this, well, you jolly well won't have the chance any other term. Two-faced little beast. She turns the page. Right? She's angry. She's heard something she shouldn't have heard, and she's angry. Well, then, on the next page, she keeps moving, and look what she comes to now. It's so beautiful. On the next page, she came to a spell for the refreshment of the Spirit. Isn't that wonderful? The pictures were fewer here, but very beautiful. And what Lucy found herself reading was more like a story than a spell. It went on for 3 pages, and before she had read to the bottom of the page, she had forgotten that she was reading it all. She was living in the story, as if it were real. And all the pictures were real too. When she had got to the 3rd page and come to the end, she said, "That is the loveliest story I've ever read or ever shall read in my whole life. Oh, I wish I could have gone on reading it for 10 years. At least I'll read it over again." It's beautiful, beautiful story. And she wants to read it again, and look what happens. But here, part of the magic of the book came into play. You couldn't turn back. The right-hand pages, the ones ahead, could be turned, but the left-hand pages you can't turn that way. So, basically, the magician's book is a lot like life. How is it like life? This is a really powerful metaphor for life.
You can't go back and do it.
Good. This is, it's so simple for a child can understand it, or an Aggie. It's so simple. Sorry. I haven't had a good Aggie joke in a while.
That was a good one.
And this is what it means to live in time, right? We're destined for eternity in heaven, right? But to live in time means you can't go back. I mean, you can say thank you to someone, but you can't go back and do it over again. And that's part of what it means to say that choices have consequence. We have to be careful. Do you remember? They don't seem to have that anymore, but for a while, there was this thing with your email that if you sent an email, you had like a minute to take it back.
Yeah, you can call.
Do some of them still have that
Yes.
function? If they all have that function. And it's like terrible.
All of them do. You have to set it up.
Maybe you have to set it up, yeah. Because I don't know if you've ever done, you sent that email, it's like, I shouldn't have sent that, but it's too late, it's boom. It's like you dropped that letter in the mail, and you can't kick it back,
Or if you're telling people about a surprise party and include the person you're surprised.
Oh, no.
That's not a thing.
And that's it. You're just the loser for the rest of your life, But this is what it's like, and the kids need to understand that. I love watching, like, the Roadrunner. You remember that when you were a kid? Wile E. Coyote, Super Genius, and the Roadrunner. And those are great. I like them better than modern day cartoons. But it is funny because in those cartoons, Wile E. Coyote always falls off a cliff and explodes. And of course, what happens in the next scene? He's back. That sort of thing. Well, it doesn't actually work like that. Right? Anyway, okay. So she says, "Oh, what a shame! I did so want to read it again. Well, at least I must remember it. Let's see. It was about. Oh dear, it's all fading away again, just like a nice dream, right? And even this last page is going blank. This is a very queer book. How could I have forgotten? It was about a cup and a sword and a tree and a green hill. I know that much, but I can't remember. And what shall I do?" Do you think of any stories that you have a cup, a sword, a tree, and a green hill?
Harry Potter. I think of, yeah.
I mean, good. It's King Arthur, and what do we call that cup in King Arthur?
Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail, right? And they're looking for the Holy Grail, and the sword. Does anybody know what the sword of Longinus is? It's called that. Longinus is the name we give to the centurion at the cross. And what did that centurion do? The soldier. He pierced the side. I guess there was really 2 of them. One soldier, the centurion, said, "This is the Son of God." But that soldier, I think he's not named, but he's called Longinus in legend. He stabbed the side, and those are supposed to be relics of great power. The Holy Grail, right? And the spear of Longinus, which actually appears in Hellboy. See the original Hellboy? And it is actually true that what's his name, Hitler, did try to gather together objects that had sort of, mystical power and stuff, that he was actually into that. So there is some truth to that. He would be looking for those things. So it is the King Arthur, the Holy Grail. It's also the whole gospel story, right? Because the tree would be the tree on which Christ hung, and the green hill would be what we call Golgotha or Calvary, right? But it's that story, that strange story that's reflected in the Holy Grail. And she never could remember. And ever since that day, what Lucy means by a good story is a story which reminds her of the forgotten story in the Magician's Book. Amanda, do you have anything from childhood that you almost remember as a great story, but can't remember it? I wonder, like something we heard as a kid, or maybe a movie or something, and you just have a slight memory of it, but you can't remember. Of course, nowadays we live with Google, so sometimes you can actually find that. I've actually been able to find things I couldn't remember what they were by doing the Google search. But again, it's like something deep in the back of your mind. And maybe you heard it when you were a little kid. Anyway, I think it's just wonderful, right? Okay. Finally, can you think of one now? I have a bad memory. Anyway, and she says the spell that will make invisible things visible. And when that happens, who has been there all along? Aslan. And somebody, did you make that comment? That he's there? I think you made that comment last week, that he's there all the time. We don't see him, right?
Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit in that sense, right? Now watch what happens, because this is so beautiful. Top of page 498, it says when she sees Aslan, then her face, Lucy's face, lit up till, for a moment, but of course she didn't know it, she looked almost as beautiful as that other Lucy in the picture. Isn't that a beautiful comment? You see how here I guess it would be more like Christ now. Here in the presence of God, our true inner beauty comes out. Right? And and it's there, that true beauty is there, but it's sort of hidden. And when do women look the most pretty? Is when they're in love. I've noticed that. And also when they're pregnant, I thought. That's when they have a special glow. Okay? She looked almost as beautiful, and she ran forward with a little cry of delight and with her arms stretched out. For what stood in the doorway was Aslan himself, the lion, the highest of all high kings. And he was solid and real and warm, and he let her kiss and bury herself in his shining mane. And from the low earthquake-like sound that came from inside him, Lucy even dared to think that he was purring. Oh, Aslan, it was kind of you to come. I have been here all the time. We need to get Anthony here. I still love that. Yes. we gotta get him back to do that. He'll be our Aslan. He says, I have been here all the time, but you have just made me visible. Aslan, don't make fun of me, as if anything I could do could make you visible. It did. Do you think I wouldn't obey my own rules? Wow. That's kind of a deep theological debate that goes on. And the question is, I don't know if you've ever heard it put this way, does God do something because it's just, or is it just because God does it? Right? And generally speaking, somebody like Aquinas or somebody is going to say it's just, that God does it because it's just. But usually the real strong Calvinists are the ones that say, no, just the fact that God does it makes it just. And the reason I bring that up is because Lewis himself, in his other books, always came down on the idea of, no, God does it because it's just. He was afraid that if we say, just because God does it makes it just, we can make God seem arbitrary and whatnot. So it comes up in Mere Christianity, a lot of his other books. So every so often he'll throw a little theological tidbit in here. But his basic idea is God follows his own rules. I mean, what do you call a king who doesn't follow his own rules? Yeah, a tyrant, okay? And, if God lays down rules, right? And this is part of the big question, the big debate all Christians worry about, free will. If God gives us the power to reject him, then he's allowed to do that. In other words, the way Lewis puts it is, God can't give us free will and take it away from us at the same time, because that's a contradiction. And just because you say God says it, doesn't, if it's illogical and irrational, just saying God said it doesn't make a difference. So this is something, again, people still debate and write books about. Jerry Walls, and if you know him, he teaches here, he's written some books. He takes the side of God does it because it's just. Jerry Walls is the person that makes fun of Catholics on one side and Calvinists on the other, and he annoys everybody. But you can't help but like the guy.
I was going to say, though,
Good.
I don't know if Steve came in last minute and said, you look almost as beautiful as you used to. That would go over really well. So that comment
That's interesting.
can be perceived both ways. That Aslan, that C.S. Lewis makes there, that she looks almost as beautiful
Oh. Huh.
as, so it depends on.
I guess the point you're saying, I mean, Lewis certainly needs it to say her true inner beauty shines forth.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Some women wouldn't take it that way.
That's true. And that's because he was a bachelor when he wrote this book,
That's right.
basically. I think you're right. You always have to be careful with the wife. If you say, you're looking particularly beautiful today. What, was I looking ugly yesterday? I guess the guys don't think that way. I don't know. If it's a compliment, you should just take it and be happy, basically, They tried. But that is true, though. That is kind of funny. So he says, now watch this. After a little pause, he spoke again. Child, I think you have been eavesdropping. I ain't been dropping no eaves. You don't recognize that? That's from Lord of the Rings. That's when, don't turn me into nothing unnatural. Okay. Anyway, you listened, he said, eavesdropping? You listened to what your two schoolfellows were saying about you. Oh, that. I never thought that was eavesdropping, Aslan. Wasn't it magic? Spying on people by magic is the same as spying on them in any other way. Look, we can all make these wonderful justifications, right? Well, that wasn't bad. That wasn't gossip. That was a prayer request, kind of thing, right? He says, and you have misjudged your friend. She is weak, but she loves you. She was afraid of the older girl and said what she does not mean. And that's true.
I like that part.
That is true.
I like that. As a parent, I like that part.
Oh, that's true. Good to remember that. And that's something to try to explain. But watch what happens. Lucy says, I don't think I'd ever be able to forget what I heard her say. No, you won't. See, choices have consequences. She made the mistake, the sin ultimately of doing that, and she's now heard something. Like don't do that. Don't be well, this doesn't happen as much today because we all have our own individual cell phones, right? But when we used to have, regular phones, I'm sure like in your house, you would have 2 or 3 phones in the same line.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and if you pick it up, you better, I even scream at my father. He's always on the line saying that. He's like, hey, speak up. You may hear something you don't want to hear. Don't do that. That's not good. And again, sometimes like I said here, Aslan's telling her the truth. The girl didn't mean it, but Lucy heard it. No, you won't. And then she said, oh dear, have I spoiled everything? Do you mean we would have gone on being friends if it hadn't been for this and been really great friends all our lives perhaps, and now we never shall? Child, did I not explain to you once before that no one is ever told what would have happened? Does anybody remember when Aslan told her that before? It's in Prince Caspian. It's in the previous book. Go ahead, you remember? Good. It's in the woods where, remember, because she didn't follow the first time, they got lost, right? They almost got shot by arrows. All these bad things happened. And she says, oh, you mean if I'd follow you, everything would have been wonderful? It wouldn't have been like Aslan? And he says, dearest one, no one is ever told what would have happened. That's part of what it means to live in time as well. When we make a choice, we're never really going to know what would have happened if we'd obeyed. I mean, to me, that's a really serious message to a young person that you need to, because especially when you're young, as you get older, hopefully you have more realization that choices have consequence. But when you're young, you feel invulnerable, you think everything can change and all that sort of stuff. And sometimes you have to be taught that sometimes the mistake will haunt you, right? And you have to be careful. And now you'll never know what would have happened. Yes, Aslan, you did. I'm sorry, but please, speak on, dear heart. Shall I ever be able to read that story again? The one I couldn't remember? Will you tell it to me, Aslan? Oh, do. Indeed. Yes, I will tell it to you for years and years. The implication is, when will he tell her the story? In heaven, ultimately, what he's saying, right? Now, if you've seen The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, they do a really cool version of this book, but they make a big change, okay, in the movie. And it's a change that I think is cool and it works, but it's bad because it takes away this really important message that children need to know, that choices have consequences and you'll never know what would have happened. Okay, in the movie, and it's actually pretty cool. She's looking at the book and she comes to the spell to make her beautiful, and Aslan stops her, but then she rips out the page and puts it in her pocket. And later on, when she's in the Dawn Treader, she opens it and says it. And then it's a really cool magical scene where suddenly there's like a door on the side of the cabin, and she opens the door and walks out into brilliant sunlight, and it's like a World War II setting, where they're playing the big band music and all the beautiful people. And now Lucy is Susan. And she comes out and she meets her two brothers, Edmund and Peter, who of course are not in the third book. They brought them back, right? And they're all having a great time, and they're all saying, and Lucy, who's now Susan, says something about Narnia. And they say, Narnia? What's Narnia? Narnia! See, it turned out, because there was no Lucy, nobody ever found Narnia, right? So, oh my gosh. And she runs back, and Aslan forgives her, and there's no consequences whatsoever, right? Because everything's fine. And you know what the message turns out? In the movie, this little girl stowaways on the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and she becomes friends with Lucy. And it's kind of a cute friendship. But there's one scene where the little girl says to Lucy, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. And Lucy says, no, when you grow up, you should be just like yourself. Now, there's nothing wrong with that message per se. But the trouble is that the last two generations of kids have had that told to them every single day of their life. They don't need to hear that message, okay? They don't need to hear you can be a pop star too. They need to hear that choices have consequences. So what I'm saying is that they took away the message that this generation needs to hear more than ever, and just gave it a kind of cliche that it's not. Look, there actually were times in history when it would have been really nice if people had heard that. It's okay to be yourself. But this is not an age when we need to hear that, right? And in that book I told you, the Screwtape Letters, the devil tells his nephew, that's what you got to do. You got to get them seeking after the very thing they don't need at the wrong time. Turn it around, right? So you're living in an age that's cruel, and that's when you tell people moderation is terrible. You see, and in a cruel age, you need to hear moderation. But in an age that has no moral standards, that's when you need to hear about standards, not when you need to hear about tolerance, right? So anyway, again, Lewis has this incredible insight. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Incredible insight. So, okay, now, not only does Aslan come back, visible, but Corey who is the magician here. And did anybody understand who it turns out Corey also is? What have you picked up on that? He's a magician, but he's actually also a star, as we'll find out. It's very brief. Yeah, we find out later he's a star. And by the way, there's a really cool part in the movie, and it's from the book, where they explain to Corey all the things they've seen, and he uses his magic to make a map. And in the movie, he kind of rolls it out, and this map appears. And there's a lot of good magical stuff in the movie. It's well worth seeing. Okay, so anyway, Corey is there, and Aslan and Corey are talking, and Corey is a magician, but he's sort of the caretaker for these very, very stupid Duffelpuds. Right? Did you understand how stupid they are? We find out later that they're so stupid that one day the cat found its way into the place where they kept all the milk. And so they spent all day moving all the giant cans of milk out of the pantry. Nobody thought to move the cat. Did you understand that? That's how stupid they are, right? Or he told them, to get their water from a stream. Koryakin gave them a stream, but they insisted on going all the way to the well and carrying the water back. And he's like, I gave you the stream, right? They even talked about washing the plates before dinner to save time after dinner. That was real funny. Or they talked about planting boiled potatoes to save them time cooking. Anyway, I think this is really funny. That's just how stupid they are. Okay? Anyway, so at the beginning of chapter 11 there, on page 499, welcome, sir, to the least of your houses. Do you grow weary, Koryakin, of ruling such foolish subjects as I have given you here? No, they are very stupid, but there is no real harm in them. I begin to grow rather fond of the creatures. Sometimes, perhaps, I am a little impatient, waiting for the day when they can be governed by wisdom instead of this rough magic. All in good time, Koryakin. Yes, all in very good time, sir. Do you intend to show yourself to them? Nay, I should frighten them out of their senses. Many stars will grow old. See this little reference there, a little hint, yeah. Many stars will grow cold and come to take their rest in islands before your people are ripe for that. And then this was actually Clinton's comment. And today, before sunset, I must visit Trumkin the dwarf, where he sits in the castle of Cair Paravel, counting the days till his master Caspian comes home. I will tell him all your story, Lucy. Do not look so sad. We shall meet soon again. Please, Aslan, what do you call soon? I call all times soon. Disappears. Because God lives in eternity. He doesn't live in time, he lives in eternity. Right? And what is that famous phrase from the Bible? To God, this is like this, and this is like this.
One day is
Good. One day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years is like a day. Right? And it's almost like Narnia, right? Because remember we said that the time scheme between Earth and Narnia is not like a mathematical 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. They just operate on totally different time schemes. So you never know. And in fact, if you read really carefully in when we get to the last battle, there's one time where the time moves faster in Narnia than it moves faster on the Earth than it does in Narnia. So it's just there is no a formula or equation that you can figure out. You never know once you leave how long it's going to be. But anyway, all times are soon. Now, do we understand here? What is the difference between the way God relates to people in the Old Testament and the New Testament? If we think about what Koryakin is doing, how is Koryakin more like a sort of Moses figure? Okay, so good. There is a change, right? In the Old Testament, God speaks to the law. He's a little bit more distant. But then, and you might even, it sounds like you might have that wonderful verse that, in the past, God spoke through the prophets and our fathers, but now he spoke through Christ. That there's a change. And like I said, some theologians are like, oh, it's progressive revelation that God changes. But God doesn't change. We become more able to understand more of God. Right? And I want you to think about this, okay? Paula, when your kids were young, right, little kids, you would insist that they hold your hand when you cross the street, right, so they don't get hurt. Would you do that when they're 20 years old? You might want to. Right? Hopefully not, right? Because the point is...
No, because I know what they're doing.
Good.
So,
And
if I'm holding their hand, it's for a different reason.
Good. Good. Now it's different. Okay.
Yeah.
So sooner or later we might get old enough that we have to hold their hand so we don't fall, right? But the point is that you hold their hand when they're a kid until they can internalize their own sense of safety, and then they can do it on their own, right? And it takes a while there. Christians seem to be held to higher standards than people in the Old Testament, because people in the Old Testament didn't have the Holy Spirit indwelling them all the time like Christians do. So God seems to hold us a little bit to a higher standard because of, we're on the other side of the cross and the resurrection. And that's what we're kind of getting here. And this concept that God doesn't change, but we change and see more of God, is there a line to that effect in Prince Caspian? Well, I think somebody will get it. Oh, Aslan, you've grown, you're bigger. And what does Aslan say instead? You remember, Amanda? What does Aslan say?
He says, no,
And I think you can get it there, right? It's, I'm not changed, but every year you grow, I will appear bigger, right? We see more of God. And I think that's true spiritually. We see more. So it's great. There's all these little reflections here on the way God works in different people and when they're ready. I call all time soon. Gone, said he, and you and I quite crestfallen. It's always like that. You can't keep him. It's not as if he were a tame lion. Hey, we've heard that before many times. And how did you enjoy my book? Parts of it very much indeed. Did you know I was there all the time? Right? And he says, being invisible always makes me sleepy. I really like that, what he said, right? And then he says, well, perhaps I'm a little, said Lucy. I have no idea what time it is. Come, said the magician. All times may be soon to Aslan. But in my home, all hungry times are 1 o'clock. I love that. He can make a good hobbit, right? First breakfast, second breakfast, 11 Z's, lunch, what are they? Have you got them memorized? Clinton, have you memorized all 6?
I used to, I don't anymore.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
My favorite was second breakfast.
Second breakfast is great. We all need second breakfast.
I use that quite a lot on the weekends.
Just keep eating. I'm hungry, mother.
Like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm in second breakfast.
Anyway, by the way, one of the funny things in this, do you notice that one of the Dufflepuds is the chief, right? And what do all the other Dufflepuds do? Did you understand what's going on? It's really kind of funny.
Copy what he said.
Good, okay. Yeah, he's right, man. Listen to him, listen. And then he'll say the absolute opposite. Oh, yeah, listen to him. Blah, blah, blah. And there's, again, this is a very deep point from Lewis. He says about when they're being uglified. Where is it when he says it? I've lost my part. 1 second. Yeah, here it is. It's a little bit later on the next page. And he says, are they awfully conceited? They are, or at least the chief duffer is, and he's taught all the rest to me. They always believe every word he says. And Lucy says, well, we noticed that. Yes, we'd get on better without him in a way, says Corey Aiken. Of course, I could turn him into something else, or even put a spell on him, which would make them not believe a word he said. But I don't like to do that. And this is a kind of almost an old-fashioned thought. It's better for them to admire him than to admire nobody. I mean, we still, even though he may not be the best, it teaches us some kind of obedience is good, right? This is a very medieval idea, right? Using medieval in the good sense, not the negative sense, right? Don't they admire you? Oh, not me. They wouldn't admire me. What was it? You uglified them for? I mean, what they call uglified. Well, they wouldn't do what they were told. And then he goes on to talk about all these different things, right? And he says something else. Oh, let me see if I can find it. I just love this. And I can almost imagine God saying this. This is on page 502, towards the bottom, a few pages later. And they're talking about how they react to Corey Aiken. And he says, that's one of the funny things about the Duffers, said the magician. 1 minute they talk as if I ran everything and overheard everything and was extremely dangerous. The next moment, they think they can take me in by tricks that a baby would see through. Bless them. I can almost imagine God saying that. How are we just like the Duffers? Think about it. 1 moment we're what? 1 moment we're what? I mean, it's happy and sad, but 1 moment we act like, God's doing everything, and he's dangerous, and he's always going on, and he's watching everything, and then suddenly, what do we think we can do? Don't we do that? We think, oh, God won't see what I'm doing because it's dark. Literally. That's why if we're like having a bad midnight snack, we're doing it in the dark, right? So nobody sees it or whatever. I mean, what I'm saying is that we've all done that. Like, so we actually think we can fool him. But the second moment, oh my gosh, he's always watching, I can't do anything. So it's a funny way of getting us to reflect on ourselves too. Maybe we're not that much smarter than the Duffers, right? I mean, God shows us the easy way to do it. We keep choosing the hard way to do it. Like, why don't you do it the hard way? Why don't you do it the easy way? So again, there's a lot of lessons to be learned here, I guess, is what I'm saying, right? Okay. Then they go into the dark island, right? And the movie makes this really scary. In fact, the movie takes the sea monster from early on and brings it into this scene. And then everybody starts having, and they yet again bring back the White Witch, because that's what Edmund fears. and all that sort of stuff. And like I said, it's kind of neat. But once again, they're caught in there. And at first, they're like, this is where dreams come true. Oh, that's dreams. Wonderful. Not dreams, not daydreams, dreams, like nightmares, right? And it's something you can't break out of. And I'm always terrified by that guy they find whose eyes are so big, they look like they're going to explode, right? He's running around, wild guy. I imagine him asking for some cheese. Did we know that reference? That's a very, very obscure reference. So a guy named Ben Gunn. You know who Ben Gunn is? Nobody ever reads, what's that called? Treasure Island? That's that little guy that's been lost. Nobody remember? Anyway. Anyway, they save this poor guy that's been stuck. And once again, Lucy prays to Aslan. Again, this time a little bit more like the Holy Spirit. And this would be page 510. It's almost the end of that chapter. Not quite. Almost the end of chapter 12. Page 510. Lucy leant her head on the edge of the fighting top and whispered, Aslan, Aslan, if ever you loved us at all, send us help now. That's sort of an arrow prayer for help. The darkness did not grow any less, but she began to feel a very, very little better. This happens, right? We're still, okay, late in life, Lewis was a lifelong bachelor. And late in life, he got married, had 3 wonderful years together, and then his wife died of cancer. Shadowlands. So you can, and if you're interested in Shadowlands, go to Amazon.com and type in Shadowlands. You can watch it for free. It's a really, really good movie. Not the big version that they made with Anthony Hopkins, which is excellent. But before that, there was a BBC TV version that is not as big budget, but it's actually closer to the truth than the Hollywood version. And it's very, very good. But anyway, after she died, he kept a journal dealing with his grief. And he didn't intend to publish it, but later on he published it as a Grief Observed, and it's one of the best books on grieving. But I'll always remember that one of the climactic moments as he's dealing with grief and trying to come back to a deeper faith, and he says, picture a man in total darkness. Because he's in the dark, he thinks he's underground in a prison. And there he sits in despair. And then suddenly he hears a sound. It could be the wind against the trees, or cattle on distant hills, or a burbling brook. But suddenly he realizes he's not in a dungeon, but out in the open air. In one sense, nothing has changed. He still waits in darkness, but now he knows that the unseen world is greater and that he's not alone. That sometimes happens, right? Have you ever heard it? It's kind of a cliche, but there's a lot of truth to it. Prayer doesn't so much change God as it changes us. You ever heard that? It sometimes builds our faith. And going back to something Clinton said, maybe God's there all along. We just don't see him. You know, I mean, okay, if you're drowning and somebody comes to save you, and you're too crazed and lack faith and grab, what's going to happen? You're going to both drown, right? You have to relax and be saved. Right?
I think of like that joke from The Pursuit of Happiness.
Oh, that movie with Will Smith?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The son tells the father, he goes, so a man falls off a boat, right, and is drowning. And somebody in the boat comes and asks him, do you need any help? He goes, no, thank you, God will save me. And then another boat comes and asks if he needs help. He goes, no, thank you, God will save me. And then he drowns. And then he goes, God, why didn't you save me? He goes, I sent you 2 boats, you big idiot.
Yeah, that's right, good. I've heard that one, right? That's true, not listening, not waiting, right? And waiting, waiting is very hard. People often say, when you say a prayer to God, there's 3 possible answers: yes, no, or wait. And nobody wants to hear that, wait. And luckily, God doesn't do what parents do. Come on, Paul, how many times has your answer to your kids been, we'll think about it? You never do that? Kind of a way of just putting it off. We're not really going to do it. Come on, Clinton, you use that one? Well, think about it. Yeah.
I used to.
Yeah, you don't use it
I
anymore.
got really sick of it. I'll think about it means no.
I'll think about it.
Now she said it like that.
Of course, you have to surprise them. Every so often you actually do it, right? Every so often you do it. So suddenly, what does she see, right? Suddenly, they see a light up there, right? Look, he said, there was a tiny speck of light ahead, and while they watched, a broad beam of light fell from it upon the ship. It did not alter the surrounding darkness, but the whole ship was lit up as if by a searchlight. Caspian blinked, stared round, saw the faces of his companions, all with wild, fixed expressions. Everyone was staring in the same direction. Behind everyone lay his black, sharply edged shadow. Lucy looked along the beam. It's really cool. That's a famous thing in C.S. Lewis, where sometimes we look at the beam, but if we look along the beam, we'll see the source where it's coming from.
Yeah, so if you start that, what you started reading over again,
Uh-huh.
the visualization that he gives, that he explains, that it's a light, but he specifically explains that it's a beam of light by saying it shined and then nothing else was brighter, right? And then he basically tells the reader how to see the scene. If you reread it, he's explaining to you exactly how to be there in that moment and see the scene rather than just interpret it.
That's interesting. You're following it. And ultimately the person he learned that from, the person that's the best of that, is actually Dante. In Dante's Divine Comedy, he has this way, we just read it, of illuminating things and moving your eye and all that sort of stuff. And in film, they talk about the difference between a realistic movie, where you're sort of looking at the movie, but it's like you're looking through your window of your house. But most directors want to direct your eye. So they find a way to get, and great paintings like this too, a Caravaggio or something, they make it in such a way that your eye will read it like this way, let's say. And there's just little clues. Often, and you're right, often it is the light, like the chiaroscuro, right? Where you follow the light and you move around. That's the kind of stuff I do next year. Good?
What I was noticing when I was reading it is that I do a poor job of trying to do a similar thing when I write. Is that in my mind, when I'm writing a story, I like to see it move as a movie, and then I can write it better if I'm seeing it happen as a movie. So as I'm writing, I like to make the reader see the room as I see the room and move around it to go wherever. Like if I have Charlie going on a path, or he's going to go out the door before I know in my mind he's going to leave the bed, leave the room, go out the door, and go down the stairs. So I'm going to start with where he's at, and I'm going to describe the window, the bed, the blanket, the stuff on the floor, then the back of the door and the doorknob, and then now he's going to run down the stairs.
Oh, good, okay.
Right, so I'm going to take the reader through the timeline and through the action of doing it, right? So what I was noticing in this is that he's doing that like to the nth degree, because he's setting a knowledge base, right? Like if you don't know how to understand what I'm writing, here's exactly what I mean. Here's an example of what it would look like, but this is what mine looks like. So in his story, he actually gives you a full sense of learning how to see it, and then describes it, so that no one reinterprets how it's being seen in his thing.
Huh,
it's like when he double explains it, he's like, and they were on blah blah blah.
Right.
Now, if you don't know what that is, then you would need to know that this is the port and this is the aft, and if you were looking, this would be this side and that would be that. So from this point forward in the story, you would know that this is that.
Good.
Right.
So he's a teacher as much as a writer.
So he's teaching the viewer how to see exactly what he wants. That's why the description of the light to me was like really striking. I was like, that is damn good. So there's no way of, because like people go, oh, there's a light. So then in your imagination, everything's lit up.
That's true, right?
Light coming from the heavens, and then your interpretation that it's this massive light. He's like, no. There's a light, and then nothing else was illuminated. It was just that. And then, right, so now you know it's a beam, and then he tells you how to follow it back up, right? He's leading the viewer, who's the reader, around. I just thought that was incredibly intelligent.
That is neat. And, and like I said, I'm talking about the next year's class, where Renaissance and even more Baroque, they're always so focused on what the light source is in the painting. It could be a candle, it could be the moon coming through the window, but you're guiding your readers, your viewers.
They also really describe the color of what you see.
Yeah.
Like like you're talking about some of the romantic writers are writing some of that fantasy, like the red-headed maiden. They're
right.
telling you that there's a blue-gray mist behind, and that the red, even though the red hair is not under light, it is lit from its intensity. So they're telling you how much contrast and color there is from the red hair to the gray background. So it's the same kind of thing. It's a hyper visualization to get you more into the story, right? If it's a fantastic story, how do I get grounded in a fantastic story? Well, you set a scene so that I can see it, because it's such a fantastic thing. Like seeing a dragon is an incredibly fantastic thing, right? And everyone can imagine a dragon differently. But if you distract us by the water, the river, the rocks, the gold, the coins, a claw, if I focus,
that's true. You're right. We see the humps before we see the whole thing.
Right. If I'm focused on the mystery, then I'm not shocked by the fantasy of it anymore, because now I'm like discovering, and I'm a detective with you, and I want to solve this problem. So this giving me fantastical things doesn't overwhelm me or put me off, because now I'm drawn in by the visualization.
Does anybody feel that way? Because in a way, what Clinton's getting at is all of us might feel this, but you don't realize what he's doing. And what he's trying to do is figure out how he did it. Like, I think we're all feeling that. We are all drawn in or taken into this world, and we accept it as real, partly because everything else is real.
Well, I think when he's doing these hyper visualizations, like Clint's mentioning, you've got to have it exactly right, or else the next scene is not going to make any sense about the albatross and how it lands, and then you wouldn't figure out. I mean, again, pulling from Greek literature with that albatross flying to the right, right here, as opposed to the
that's
left,
right.
on this, when it's leading the ship, you wouldn't recognize that without distinct, placement of that bird on the head, and then as it takes off, they follow it. It's slightly to the starboard, which I believe is the right.
Right.
And so that's the better way. If it's on the port side,
That's right. That's true. Yeah.
it's going to go to the left, which leads you directly into danger in any classical literature.
You just found yourself some more birds.
I did.
They're lurking there all the time. I love it. Man. So it is good, though. But like I said, that's good. You're seeing it. This is how he visualizes it. Makes Narnia real for us, right?
Now, when I'm reading it, I'm just constantly shocked that my initial thoughts that it was oversimplistic. It's like, hey, dumbass. When I'm reading, I really do. I feel like the sense of like, you judged a little too soon there, buddy.
This isn't just a children's book,
is like
right?
incredibly complicated and multidimensional, and
But-
just how easily it kind of reads.
Well, both Lewis and Tolkien both agreed that a book that's only worth reading by a kid is probably not worth reading at all. Is basically what they said, so they do. You're right. They put a deep kind of craft in here, but it's almost invisible. We don't realize it.
Realistically, if you're going to read this to your children, sort of like even the Harry Potter books or whatever else, when they came out, and you're reading it together, there's so much to talk about. And he gives you more than just the story, which is amazing. I mean, it's, you don't. I would just be reading the story, nothing else. So it's interesting. I love it.
That's neat. Did you read these to your kids when they were young?
No, I read Harry Potter.
Harry Potter, you've read, okay.
Harry Potters together.
Those are neat. I know parents that have read the entire Lord of the Rings to their kids. That's quite a project. That's quite a project. And already, so she looks along to be, first it looks like a cross, then an aeroplane, that's the British spelling, an aeroplane, then like a kite, and then like an albatross. Does anybody know what famous romantic poem has an albatross in it? I wonder if you ever read this in college or high school. Ever heard of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Coleridge? I wonder if you ever read that in school. He shoots the albatross. But, I mean, have you ever seen an albatross? Albatrosses are the most amazing birds. They're much more than like a seagull. A lot of albatrosses have a wingspan that's a little bit taller than I am. It's like a 6-foot wingspan. They are the most perfectly aerodynamic birds that they can sleep while they're flying. Apparently, they will circle the globe many, many times in their life. They can go halfway around the globe to get food for their kids. I mean, they're the most perfect incredible bird. Like I said, much, much more than a seagull. I've never seen one live, but I've seen them in museums and stuff, and they're just pretty amazing. Have you ever seen a live albatross, Paula? Yeah, it'd be really cool. Cool stuff. So it circles around, right? And they literally follow it out of the gloom. And I love as it leaves, it says, "Courage, dear heart." Puts the courage in Lucy. And out they go. And do you remember what single boon the Lord asks them that they save? Don't ever what? Don't ever ask me to tell you what I saw in there. He doesn't want to relive the nightmares that he saw over and over and over again. I think what he saw was 2020. It's probably what he saw. Don't ever ask me again. I don't want to remember it. Oh, man. Okay, and now, look at starting with chapter 13. This is some of the best stuff that C.S. Lewis ever wrote. These final chapters as they sail farther and farther into light. They're sailing into the east. They're sailing into the sun. And it's just, it's a spiritual journey. And part of it is based on the Odyssey. And Ulysses is actually mentioned near the end of the book. But it's also Dante. And I don't know if Paul, if you remember this, but in Dante, when he comes out of hell onto purgatory, which is on the other side of the world, he sees constellations and stars he's never seen before. Right? He's seeing the other side of the world. I mean, that is just so awesome. New stars, bigger and brighter, right? And they're moving closer and closer to the edge of the world. Oh, it's just wonderful. All Dante's Divine Comedy is basically a journey into light, like a morning glory opening up to greater and greater light, and it's just beautiful, right? And they go there and they see what will be called the Table of Aslan, right? Very Eucharistic, right? Like the Lord's Supper. And did you notice what object is on that Table of Aslan? It's the knife. What knife?
The one that looks like cheese.
Yeah, the one that you used to kill. It's made out of stone, the stone knife. And did you notice that one of them shudders when he sees it? It's Edmund. Why would Edmund shudder? I don't know if you remember.
Because it was his fault.
It was his fault, but even before Aslan was killed, the witch had held that stone knife to his neck before he was saved, right? So he's got the guilt and also the sort of fear that, right? But in a sense, this is the spear of Longinus that I mentioned before, right? Coming out of the Holy Grail legend. This is, instead of a spear that speared, it's the dagger, the knife that killed Aslan, and it's kept there at the very edge of the world. And this is like a symbol that just goes beyond anything. This strange place where every day the table is filled, right, with a banquet. But any that's not eaten by the end, what happens to it? You understand? Yeah, these birds come out of the east and devour it and leave, because nothing must be wasted, right? What's one of the jobs of a priest, right? He's got to drink any leftover communion wine, right? Or we said he can pour it in the earth, I guess, apparently, right? But I think you're supposed to finish it if you
You're
can.
supposed to finish all the wine.
Right.
And if any though of the Eucharist drops to the ground or falls out of the container, he has to eat it. So
They have to eat it, okay. There's no 5-second rule there.
there's no
I consider to God, now sleep.
Oh, man. Oh, man. Anyway, one of my friends had a superstitious old mother, and the way the mother stopped them from eating food that fell on the floor is she told them, when food falls on the floor, the devil comes up and kisses it. Poor guy! He grew up thinking the devil lived under his house.
eat a bunch of stuff off the ground.
It's wild. Actually, you do all know, it seems to me to be almost proven now that a lot of these young people are getting sicker and all because we've raised them in too sterile an environment. So their body's not learning to fight everyday infections. That apparently this is bad. It can lead to worse strains of viruses and things like that. So let them go out in the dirt. Maybe that's the best thing.
The dirt.
Yeah, let them eat the dirt. Yeah, it's good for them, right? I remember some strange kid when I was a kid that ate chalk. Did you know any kids that ate the chalk? That was weird.
Magnesium deficiency or
Oh, maybe. No, I've heard about that. That's right. Like people that eat raw spaghetti or something like that. Yeah, really weird stuff. So now, what's really neat about this is that these birds, I think, are a sort of redemptive version. Okay, if you know anything about the story of Jason and the Argonauts, Jason meets this guy named Phineas. And Phineas did something bad, and he's blinded. And what happens is he goes to his table, and they lay out a feast. But as soon as he starts eating the food, you know who shows up? I don't know if you know the story. They're called the Harpies. These evil sort of bird ladies. Remember them? They come down, and they steal his food, or they foul it, so he can't even eat it. And to me, this is almost like a perfection. They're not harpies. They're these beautiful birds that take it, because nothing must be wasted. You don't leave it out to rot or something like that. And I think of so many parables of Jesus are about the banquet, the wedding feast. And remember, my wedding banquet must be full. And if the rich people don't come, what does he say to do? Remember the parable? Yeah. Go out to the highways and the byways. Go to Oklahoma and Arkansas. Get the poor people and take them into my feast, right? Because it's got to be full. And so there's lots of it's one of those things where it's not exactly a one-to-one to the Bible, but it captures a whole sense of those parables. And we've got these wonderful the last three lords, right? So what? One of the lords stayed at the island there with Gumpus, right? And then one of them turned to stone, or turned to gold. One of them turned into a dragon. The fourth was in the dark island that they saved, and the other three, and you don't have to remember their names. The other three are the ones that have fallen asleep, and their beards are all intertwined, so it looks like a big bird's nest or something, which I think is hysterical, right? And make things of Rip Van Winkle, right? Or there's a really neat legend from the early church called the Seven Sleepers. I wonder if anybody heard of it. Lewis would have heard of it. He loves this stuff. The story was that during one of the persecutions by the Romans, usually it's the Decian persecution, late 2nd century, 7 youths, Christians, were running away somewhere towards Ephesus. They were running away to hide, and the bad guys walled them up in a cave so they would starve to death. But instead, God put them in a deep sleep, and they slept for like a couple hundred years. And when they woke up, Europe was now Christian. The cool, old story, the Seven Sleepers, it's called. And I believe that it's a story in the Muslim world, too, of the Seven Sleepers, which is kind of interesting. But again, it's a long sleep, it's an enchanted sleep. Because the magic gets more and more tangible, more and more thick. And of course, they all want to leave, but Rinpoche, oh, this is a great adventure. Okay, we can't turn this down. This is a great adventure. He's always doing that, driving everybody crazy, right? And anyway, they come there, and they see the stone table, and they see the beautiful girl, and it's really kind of fun in the movie. We never get to meet Ramandu in the movie, unfortunately, but we do meet his pretty daughter. And the daughter comes down, and she explains the form, and then she says to Caspian and Edmund, I can change my form if you would like. No. She's really pretty. Anyway, it's a cute moment in the movie. And she says, the food will not hurt you. These people never touch the food. But when they touched the knife, it poisoned them, and they were about to kill each other, and boom, they were all put to sleep. And I don't know if you understood, it's kind of fun, right? In a lot of fairy tales, right, you have to kiss the princess, and then everybody will wake up. Remember, in Sleeping Beauty, it's not just Beauty who's asleep, Aurora, but the whole castle, everybody's asleep, right? So first you have to kiss the princess, and then all the sleepers will wake. And then what does the girl tell him? You understand it? Here, you got to break the spell, and then you can kiss the princess, right? And he will end up marrying her. She doesn't really have a name. She's the daughter of the star. Anyway, it's a cute little play on that. And wait till we read The Silver Chair. It's a cute little play on the Orpheus and Eurydice story, where the one captured is not the girl, but this time it's the boy, and he's got to be rescued. So he plays a little bit with some of the myths in these stories. And anyway, it's time to meet Ramandu, right, who shows up, and it's chapter 14, Let's see. Let's look at the birds. We have to do that for Paula. This is page 520. Page 520, I think it is. It says, it's in the very beginning of chapter 14, the fourth paragraph. Then something seemed to be flying at them out of the very center of the rising sun. But of course, one couldn't look steadily in that direction to make sure. But presently, the air became full of voices which took up the same song that the lady and her father were singing, but in far wilder tones, and in a language which no one knew. And soon after that, the owners of these voices could be seen. They were birds, large and white, and they came by hundreds and thousands and alighted on everything, on the grass and the pavement, on the table, and your shoulders, your hands, and your head. Is this something you want to see, Paula?
No.
Or maybe not. That's too many birds.
No, I think it's fine, but aren't they different everywhere?
I know, yeah, that's it. I guess they must be magical birds that don't, yeah. Yeah. Did any of you ever see any of you ever see a movie called High Anxiety by Mel Brooks? It's Mel Brooks did a movie where he made fun of all the Alfred Hitchcock movies. I taught a class on Hitchcock for the MFA a long time ago. And it's, remember the birds? You've probably heard of the birds, right? Well, there's this scene where Mel Brooks is walking through the park, and all of a sudden these birds come, and they start pooping on him, and he's running, screaming, and he finally runs into one of those gazebos, and he sits here, and then all of a sudden, poop, and he looks up, and it's a gazebo with an open circle, and all you see are these little bird butts all the way around. And he runs, and finally he runs into, what do you call that, the dry cleaners, and everybody runs out in the opposite direction. Mel Brooks, he's still alive too, that guy. He's still funny, like 90 years old, he's still going strong. Anyway, crazy guy. Yeah, did I say high society? I'm sorry, high anxiety it's called. Yeah, high anxiety. It makes fun of the birds, it makes fun of Psycho, it makes fun of Spellbound, North by Northwest, a whole bunch of them are really funny. But anyway, oh boy, lose my voice here. So they're coming in, and it says, for like snow, they not only made everything white, but blurred and blunted all shapes. But Lucy, looking out from between the wings of the bird, maybe you should draw this. You know what you could do? If you think about these birds coming in, all full of light, if you go look up Gustave Doré's etchings of Dante's Divine Comedy,
right.
If you look at his prints of the Paradiso, they're all based on big circles of light. And so if you look at them, it'd be an interesting idea to do something like this, but in the Doré style. It would be really cool. But they're beautiful if you look at them. And they're all free online. Okay, now look what happens. I love this. It says, she saw one bird fly to the old man, Ramadou, with something in its beak that looked like a little fruit, unless it was a little live coal, which it might have been, for it was too bright to look at. And the bird laid it in the old man's mouth. Now, if you remember this from the Bible, I'll be impressed. It's Isaiah chapter 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and mighty on his throne, and the train of his garment was filled with light, and the seraphim are there, and they're saying again and again, holy, 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 the Lord God of hosts, the whole earth is filled with your glory. And when Isaiah comes in the presence of God, you remember what he says? I don't know if he remembers. He says, woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, from a people of unclean lips. And then something really weird happens. Say it. You remember?
Yeah,
One of the seraphim goes with tongs.
Put coal or something.
Good. So it picks up a live coal that's like burning before the Lord and touches his lips. This is, touch my lips, my sin is forgiven, and my guilt is taken away. I know that really well because I grew up Greek Orthodox. And the Orthodox do the same thing like Catholics when they have the Mass. But I don't think the Catholics use this phrase. In the Orthodox Church, first the priest takes and when he takes it, he says, this is touch my lips, my guilt is forgiven. I don't think that's in the Mass, but it's in the liturgy. So I've always heard that so many times. And it's a powerful image of touching the lips and purifying them. And of course, Isaiah will be probably the greatest of the prophets. Amazing. Does anybody know how the British pronounce the name Isaiah? They say Isaiah. You listen to it. That's how the British pronounce it. Today, too. Isaiah. But I think it sounds pretty cool. Anyway, it's like they don't call it garbage. They call it rubbish, which makes it almost sound clean. I don't know. Anyway, rubbish.
The garage is the garage,
The garage, that's right, the garage.
and then the trash can is the bin.
The bin, oh, that's right, the trash bin. And you've got to, you don't rent a room, you hire a flat. Hire a flat. They're still learning English over there on the other side of the pond. So, to break the spell, you've got to go far into the east and leave someone behind who will never return. And who says, that's what I want to do? Reepicheep, right? That's why he's on this voyage. He's the mystical Reepicheep. Still a little bit. What's that? What did he say? Let's do it. I'm the one. This is easy. Anyway, you get that one? I'll be impressed. Can you recognize that? This is easy. Come on. What is your name? What is your quest? What is your favorite color? You haven't seen Monty Python Holy Grail?
Oh my gosh.
Anyway.
You're like an encyclopedia.
Oh, it's good. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Anyway, now here we got it. It's on page 521. He must go into the utter east and never return into the world. That is my heart's desire. That's what he's seeking after. And are we near the world's end now, sir? Have you any knowledge of the seas and lands farther east? I saw them long ago, but it was from a great height. Do you mean that you were flying in the air? Eustace immediately, very concrete thinker. I was a long way above the air, my son. I am Ramandu. But I see that you stare at one another and have not heard this name. And no wonder, for the days when I was a star had ceased long before any of you knew this world, and all the constellations have changed. Golly, said Edmund under his breath, he's a retired star. Aren't you a star any longer? I am a star at rest, my daughter. When I set for the last time, decrepit and old beyond all that you can reckon, I was carried to this island. I am not so old now as I was then. Every morning a bird brings me a fireberry from the valleys of the sun, and each fireberry takes away a little of my age. And when I have become as young as the child that was born yesterday, then I shall take my rising again, for we are at earth's eastern rim, and once more tread the great dance. Wow. That's what it says in the Once in the Future King. Anybody ever read that? T.H. White? That Merlin doesn't age, he youthens. He ages backwards. He remembers the future. Or the curious case of Benjamin Button, if you see that. Do you ever see that? That's kind of good. You know, that's based on a short story by F. Scott Fitzgerald, of all people, the guy who wrote The Great Gatsby. Anyway, I just love that this is sort of magic, right? And every day he gets younger until he's a new star and he goes over. And then, arguably the greatest line in all of C.S. Lewis, Eustace says, oh my gosh, in our world, a star is a huge ball of flaming gas. Pumbaa, to you everything is gas. No, that, is it? It's Lion King, right, but is it, yeah, but Pumbaa, no, yeah, it's right, Pumbaa. Timon says that to Pumbaa. Pumbaa, to you everything is gas, okay. So, a star is just and watch what Ramandu says. This is one of the great insights of Lewis. Even in your world, my son, that is not what a star is, but only what it is made of. That is one of the most profound critiques of sort of modern materialism and scientism that thinks we've understood everything because we understand what it's made of. Let me explain what that means, okay? What am I made of? I'm made up of so much flesh and bone and blood and sinew and all sorts of nasty internal organs, right? But I hope that who I am is something different than what I'm made of. But in our modern world, we seem to think if we know what something's made of, we therefore know what it is. Have you ever watched, I watch these documentaries all the time, where you meet these scientists, right, who have, where they scan the brain, and they can discover what part of your brain lights up when you're in love. And if you listen to these people, they actually say things like, now we understand love. Wait, what do you mean, idiot? You don't understand anything about love. You know, just because you know what part of the brain, that doesn't get to the essence. Generally speaking, the unseen things are more real and more lasting and more mysterious than the things we see. But we have we live in what's often called a reductive age because we've reduced everything down to the mere physical. One thing that drives me crazy is doctors, especially like psychiatrists, who think because they have a name for something, they understand the brain. Like they come up with a name like bipolar or schizophrenia, and they think they therefore understand it, right? Not only do they not really understand it, they don't even really understand why the drugs work that they give you. And they don't understand why the drugs work for like 6 months and then they stop working, right? I mean, but somehow we think because we have a name for something, we understand it. Right? And that's why we need the artistic temperament to see beyond that, right? The realities that are deeper than that. Because once we reduce ourselves to cogs in a wheel, that's when you end up in, some kind of totalitarian government where you're just a cog and nothing more. Does that make sense? Have anybody seen that? You see that attitude? Do you know what they now say? That the majority of what's out there is now dark matter or dark energy. You know that? That's like over 50% of what's out there is dark matter or dark energy. And we don't understand what it is, but we have a name for it. That's what we think. We don't really understand the craziness of it. You know what? Do we really fully understand a lot of these things? They're mysteries.
No. No, we do not.
But again, this is the point that he's getting at. It's a very powerful critique that, again, we may have a name for it, we may understand this. You know what it reminds me of? Why do birds fly south for the winter? Instinct, which is another way of saying we don't really know what it's like. Yes, we have gravity, even something like gravity. We have a word for it, but do we fully understand the essence of it? And we need to understand, again, one of those cliches is the whole is more than its parts. I hope that I'm something more than just the parts that make me up. There's something beyond that, right? Something ultimately beyond the physical, whatever, metaphysical or something. But it's just great, and it's so simple, but so powerful. He goes on and says, and in this world you have already been a star, for I think you have been with Koryakin. Is he a retired star too? Well, not quite the same. It was not quite as a rest that he was set to govern the Duffers. You might call it a punishment. He might have shone for thousands of years more in the southern wonder sky if all had gone well. What did he do, sir? My son, it is not for you, a son of Adam, to know what faults a star can commit. When I read that, it gives me like a numinous feel. I don't exactly know what it means, but it's like, what sin can a star commit? This is wild, right? You guys getting inspired? You know what you're going to do next week?
I'm still thinking about it.
You still thinking? I go for it.
I'm hoping I can come up with something at the last minute.
Oh, there we go. The Hail Mary toss in the football game or whatever. Anyway,
Last minute.
he says you're going to keep moving forward, right? And just look on the next page. Is it the next page? Oh, it's the bottom of the page, 522. He says, who's going to go with you? And he says, my son, it would be no use, even though you wished it, to sail for the world's end with men unwilling or men deceived. That is not how great unenchantments are achieved. They must know where they go and why. And so he pulls the typical ploy that, even parents might do. Hey, I didn't say anybody could go. You got to earn the right to go. It's kind of like, hey, if you give me an apple, I'll let you whitewash the fence with me. Glad nobody remembers that story?
That's the whole, like,
That's close, not Huckleberry Finn, but...
You have to suffer to be worthy of being taught.
Yep.
Kind of like the samurais up on the mountain.
Yep.
That, like, you want to be taught, you're like, teach me, and then they're like, no. And then you have to do all the suffering to be worthy of being taught, right?
Yeah.
Keep polishing my car, kid. Keep waxing my car. Wax on, wax off. But it is, they've got to go. And on page 524, at the middle of the page, we have, I think, one of the great embodiments of what it means to have a true adventurous spirit. My kids grew up on the Disney Channel, and, there are worse things than the Disney Channel. And they used to always say, follow your dream. And at first I thought, oh, how nice that is, until I watched it and I realized that all I think Disney means by follow your dream is you can be a pop star for 5 minutes too. This is what it really means, to follow your star, to follow your wish. Rinpoche says, I don't care what anybody else is doing. For me, he says, my own plans are made. While I can, I sail east in the Dawn Treader. When she fails me, I paddle east in my coracle. When she sinks, I shall swim east with my 4 paws. And when I can swim no longer, if I have not reached Aslan's country or shot over the edge of the world in some vast cataract, I will sink with my nose to the sunrise, and Peepakeek will be king of the talking mice in Narnia. Wow. That is what it means to give all, to find the pearl of great price, perhaps, in the parables. You sell everything and buy the pearl of great price. He will seek. It's not about 5 minutes of fame. Who was it? Andy Warhol, right? It's not about that. It's about seeking after your true heart's desire, finding what you were made for. This is something beyond vanity, beyond a search for pride and arrogance. It's finding what you were truly made for. And he is going to go to the very end. That's just true courage, right? And you must keep going, right? Aslan's maid, do you think that the privilege of seeing the last things is to be bought for a song? That's what Caspian says. You need to ask permission. And in the end, all of them go, except one person. They don't let him go. Because, what's that? Well, not Caspian. Well, that's later. But at the very end of the chapter, page 525, the last paragraph of the chapter, there's only one sailor that doesn't actually go on the Dawn Treader.
The last one.
Yeah, that last one. And I love, we get like a little biography of him, right? And his name, where is it? His name is Pit and Cream. There he is. Pit and Cream stayed on the island of the star all the time the others were away, looking for the world's end. And he very much wished he had gone with them. He shouldn't have stayed behind. He wasn't the sort of man who could enjoy talking to Ramandu and Ramandu's daughter, nor they to him. Right? And it rained a good deal, and though there was a wonderful feast on the table every night, he didn't really much enjoy it. He said it gave him the creeps sitting there alone and in the rain, as likely as not, with those 4 lords asleep. Oh, 4, you missed that. Aslan, Ramandu is very nice, and the guy that was in the Dark Island, they put him to sleep, but a completely dreamless sleep, which this guy really needs. Right? Really needs. He says, and when the others returned, he felt so out of things that he deserted on the voyage home at the Lone Islands and went and lived in Calorman. We're going to meet the bad guys in a few novels, The Horse's Book, where he told wonderful stories about his adventures at the end of the world until at last he came to believe them. This is what it means to miss out on the true adventure. Say it again?
No.
You think?
I say life.
Like, to miss out on the true life, the life that was given to us. And it's so sad. And it says, so you may say in a sense that he lived happily after, but he could never bear mice. I always remembered Rinpoche, all that. So, okay, they move on to the wonders of the last sea. Again, we're journeying more and more into the light. The beginning of that chapter on 527. One did not want to go to bed, nor to eat much, nor even to talk except in low voices. Another thing was the light. There was too much of it. The sun, when it came up each morning, looked twice, if not 3 times its usual size. And every morning, which gave Lucy the strangest feeling of all, the huge white birds, singing their song with human voices in a language no one knew, streamed overhead and vanished astern on their way to their breakfast at Aslan's table. Deeper and deeper they're going into the sea. And then, it reminds me a little bit of episode 1. What was that called? What was the first Star Wars, episode 1?
4.
What's that?
4.
No, the episode 1, what was it called? Phantom Menace, thank you, Phantom Menace. Yeah, remember the Phantom Menace? That was kind of silly, but it did have that cool set piece of those people that lived under the sea? You remember?
Oh,
It's a while since I saw it.
Yeah.
But it's like there's an entire, I don't know if they had this in mind, but I love how Lewis takes the time to say, these are like the real mermaids, right? Because these are not the mermaids that can go, you know.
Nothing worse.
Wait, what was that from?
That's who took him. That's who took him there, right?
What's that?
Jar Jar Binks is who took
Oh,
him.
oh yes. Oh gosh, Georgia. Oh man, that was sad. Did even kids think he was funny? I don't think anybody thought he was
Nobody
funny.
liked him.
Yeah. Oh,
Nobody,
but have you watched the special where somebody suggested that he was really supposed to be a Sith Lord? I'm serious. Somebody did that, put together, made a very compelling case that he was actually a Sith in disguise. But I don't
I
know.
would like them to remaster the movie. And
Yeah, just take him out.
Take him right out.
He really was sad. Really sad. Anyway, but he gives us the whole life. Okay, most mermaids can live out of the water a little bit, but these live under the ground and everything's upside down, right? So their valleys are down low, whenever their hills are, or no, their hills are down low and their valleys are, and the picture, did you understand what they're doing? Okay, in the Middle Ages, well, you can't do this, but have you ever been to the Red Fest and seen the birds of prey? The people that do falconry? I always love to go there, right? And instead of the falcons that fly up and kill the prey, they've got little fish on there. And look at the picture. I didn't realize until I looked really closely. Look at page 527. If you look really closely at that picture, you'll see the dude all the way on the left has a fish on his arm, and the one in the middle with the crown has a fish right on his wrist. Can you see that? I always missed it, and I kept looking more carefully. And that's pretty cool. And so these fish are like hawks that go kill little fish. It's just really fun. Oh my gosh. No. Hello?
Oh, no, I haven't seen it. Let's go.
Thank you. That was really weird. Only during reading Narnia, you know.
It's Aslan.
It was that, wait, that's good. That was the husky. What's Minto? No, what Minto? What is the name of the one? What is the name of the husky? Isn't it like Kiza? Thank you. What does Minto come from? I don't know where I heard that name. I don't know. Kiza, you're right. It's Kiza. That's it. Thank you. Kiza, man. What is Minto? I don't know where that came from. Oh, it's a Minto. I don't know why that name just popped into my mind for some strange reason. I'm not sure. Anyway, but they go on and did you like that little scene? I wonder if you remember the scene, Amanda, when you were a kid, when Lucy looks down and sees a mermaid and they immediately become friends. And it's like they never saw each other again, but if they ever saw each other again, they would run and hug each other, right? And she's a mermaid, but what she is she's like a shepherdess. But instead of shepherd, she's taking care of fish. Just these wonderful, beautiful little things that open it up.
I thought that was like an explanation of fellowship.
I guess in a way it is. And you're going to see it again when we read The Horse and His Boy, where the two boys meet each other, and it's like suddenly they become friends without even realizing it. They become friends. And so that's really neat. Anyway, Reepicheep jumps overboard because he saw, he's going to go steal the dog. He sees, what's that? Yeah, I don't. Oh, you saw somebody other than the dog? Huh. You should be careful. Yeah. Every so often, they'll bring that husky into the UAC suite over there. I don't know why.
That's not the husky yet.
That's not the husky. That's people I don't like.
Because it's like the husky's now at least like a year or two old. Because every case of
Oh, you're saying that dog was not the husky?
It's not the husky.
Oh.
And the husky now is grown. It's a grown dog.
Oh, okay. Unless this is husky in waiting or something?
No.
That's
I
odd.
think it's called somebody just walking through.
Okay, be careful.
Yeah.
I'm allergic to dogs, so I don't want the dog in my lap. But it was cute. But anyway, so Reepicheep, the idea is that one of the mermen shook his spear and Reepicheep jumped in. It's like, crazy mouse. And that's when he discovers, it's a mouse. I love it. Yeah, he's a mouse. He said the Napoleon complex. Were you the one that said that? Napoleon complex? Yeah, because he's short. Anyway, where was that? So, when he dives overboard, what does Reepicheep discover about the water?
It's sweet.
It's sweet. It's fresh water. It was salt water, and suddenly it's fresh water. It's a miracle, right? And it's the sign that they're moving to the end. And they bring up the water. And this is on page 531, 532. It's after he says, where the waves grow sweet. It says, the king took the bucket in both hands, raised it to his lips, sipped, then drank deeply and raised his head. His face was changed. Not only his eyes, but everything about him seemed to be brighter. Yes, it is sweet. That's real water, that. I'm not sure that it isn't going to kill me, but it is the death I would have chosen if I'd known about it till now. Did you cause trouble out there?
What was that? Oh, no.
Is the dog still pacing around?
They just now took it out.
Oh, okay. We have to protect our space. Does it bother you? Now, you guys still don't have locks in your door, do you? Your studio?
Yeah, we do.
You do. Yours have them. That's right. The ones along here don't have them.
These people don't.
Yeah.
We all do in our hallway.
Which is crazy.
We're special.
Because it's not just your paintings. Your raw materials are expensive. Yeah, that's
My
really
studio
expensive.
has a bouncer.
There's a bouncer?
Yeah, I have a,
Oh, that's right. You're the antechamber to protect him.
Get past me to get to him.
Chris can tell an assassin by his eyes. He just looks at
No
him.
groupies, no nothing.
Yeah. We want Clinton's autograph. Away. That's hysterical.
really funny.
Man. Now, I love what happens when they drink the water.
Look at that sneer she's giving right
The sneer,
now. Look at that. Ooh.
we can't see her whole face. How can you tell? So you can just tell. She's wrinkling her nose,
Her
huh?
eyes when she's sneering. Yeah.
Oh man, this is a great class. I tell you. We got Chris. We can't lose you, but we'll see. They might take you away. But if they take you away, you'll be able to take the class next year. And make sure we get Moto and Kelly back. That's what we really need, because they're going to graduate. So we'll see. Kelly, man, did you see her pictures on Facebook? She looks like she's carrying dead bodies around now.
Oh my gosh, is that hysterical? I want to go see her in roller derby.
Oh my
That chick
God.
is strong as an ox, by the way.
And she keeps hitting girls over the rail. Is no problem.
Who, Kelly does that?
I would not want to.
No.
I would not want to fight her.
I would not want to fight her, and I'm like a big dude. That chick
It's
is
tough, huh?
full up like Terminator chick. She's like, what was that? Linda Hamilton?
That's right, there you go.
That's a good resemblance.
Right? Like she's like seriously
She's
like
tough, man.
she's like rocked out. Like her arms are like. I am not messing with that woman. No.
I'm not sure she's not in the special.
You know that-
Oh, that's right, yes.
Dr. Marcos, last year I sat next to her in classes, and then whenever I would talk too much or ask too many questions, she would hit me.
She would actually hit you.
Yes.
In the shoulder, in the stomach, or shoot you? Boom. Oh, right. You gotta watch out.
I always told Kelly that I would make her a sandwich.
Oh, here we go, yeah. It's funny. Yeah. She is tough.
Make me a sandwich.
Good sandwich. Boom.
Yeah, but you know, but anyway, she's a nice person who, I have another friends who know her away from
Yeah.
where we know her. And the kind notes and thoughtful things she sends out, it's just, I'm always scared, she's gonna, she's always glaring here. She's always in her art mode. And so it's a
She's very focused, yeah.
She's very.
And then with everybody else, she's very, very soft, and it's just a complete
It's interesting.
juxtaposition. Yeah, it's really
She's nice to
interesting.
me.
Oh yeah, she's not saying she's not nice, but she's very.
I guess people get focused when they're, yeah.
She's here. It's really what it is. Yeah.
Can't bother them.
Yeah.
She never beat up on
I
Lupe,
hope you
did
get
you?
her in class too. She's
Yeah, well, we had her in class last semester. So that's how we hope we'll get her back.
Okay.
Yeah, she was in class with Paula. So we'll get her back.
Yeah.
We almost did. She changed her mind like the very last minute. We'll get her back. Then so look at this water, this mountain water here, right? 532. And one by one, everybody on board drank. And for a long time, they were all silent. They felt almost too well and strong to bear it. And presently, they began to notice another result. As I have said before, there had been too much light ever since they left the island of Ramundu. The sun too large, though not too hot. The sea too bright. The air too shining. Now the light grew no less. If anything, it increased. But they could bear it. They could look straight up at the sun without blinking. They could see more light than they had ever seen before. And the deck and the sail and their own faces and bodies became brighter and brighter, and every rope shone. Wow. All right. In the Middle Ages, they believed that the eagle had such pure eyes that it could stare directly in the sun and not go blind. And that's really what the eagle eyes is, partly because eagles can see far away. But in the Middle Ages, it became a type of, and and you've heard of a griffin that's half eagle and half lion. And the lion part represents the human side of Jesus, the Lion of Judah. And the eagle that soars to heaven and stares into the sun represents the divine side of Jesus. And the one gospel writer who writes the most about the divine side of Jesus is, you know which gospel writer that is? Good, John. And each of the disciples have a, what do you want to call it? Like a icon, not an icon, what's the word? A symbol. What's that?
Like an animal or...
Yeah, that's linked to them, a symbol or and for John, it's the eagle. The eagle represents John. For Mark, it's a lion. For Matthew, it's an ox. Yeah, Matthew's the man, and then the ox is Luke. As you see, it's a lot of art and stuff like that. It's really neat. But again, their eye is being so purified, they can look into the sun. Right? And that's part of the idea of Dante's Purgatory. You're already saved, but are you really ready to gaze directly on the pure light of God and holiness of God? You need to be prepared. And this really is, they're being prepared. The farther east they go, the more they are able to bear the light. On and on. And this is also, and I don't know, any of you share my fear of heights? Okay, I can't do heights. It's been a long time since I've been on a roller coaster.
I hate roller coasters, but I'm not
gosh. Have you ever done, remember the old Six Flags? Astroworld had the dungeon drop.
Yeah.
Oh, and the other Six Flags have even taller ones.
First time I ever cussed, when my brother cussed in front of my dad, we didn't get in trouble.
Oh, when you were coming down that?
Yes.
Oh,
Very
my
first
gosh.
time, because we didn't realize, we realized after that you could hear everything. And so my little brother and I, my little brother's like 4 years younger than I, and we're on the dungeon drop or whatever, and he goes,
Oh, it
and
is.
he goes, and lets you go.
You know,
My brother and I are holding hands, and we're like strapped in, and we both in unison go,
oh, oh, my
we go
God.
down, and then we come down, and my dad's got tears in his eyes. He's laughing so hard.
Oh, my God.
And we come around the corner, and my dad goes, "Why don't y'all stand here a minute and watch these other kids? Just look at their faces." And
Oh, my gosh.
we're waiting, and these other kids go, and they yell, and you can hear everything.
Oh, you can hear everything, really?
From the
Oh, my
very
gosh.
top, because sound carries.
I
very
guess it
well
comes
from
down,
the top.
okay.
It
That's
comes down
wild.
very well, and so we could hear everything they were saying, and then my brother and I was like, we just went. Because he totally heard us. You know?
At least half the times that I went to Astroworld, and I was there, I would never go on that, but at least half the time it would get stuck.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people would be stuck. They'll be up there for 10
There's
minutes.
still a line,
Yeah.
and there was still a line. It's like
Yeah.
getting stuck, and there's still people waiting to get on.
And they're just like stuck up there for never knows. Oh,
What is that, the dungeon drop?
Yeah.
Is that the one that when it comes down, it curves at the end?
Yes, it's right. It comes straight down.
But it's just straight down. It's like a
Right at
free
the bottom-
fall.
Right at the bottom, it goes.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Right
Breaks.
down.
And some of the other ones now, like it's called Superman, that's down in, I think, whatever.
San Antonio.
Yeah, it shoots you all the way up, and then it comes all the way down, then it goes halfway up, and goes down again. And,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, there's no need to torture prisoners. Just take them to Six Flags, put them on the roller coaster a few times, and I'm sure they'll tell you everything. Okay? I would tell it to you before you put me on there. There's just no way. It's like, oh my God, I get dizzy. And, but the reason I say that is because at the end of the chapter, page 533, the last part of the chapter, we find out that it seems that Narnia is a flat world. So it's like a big plate, and all the waters are falling over, right? And there's this scene, it says, You mean, said Caspian, that we might just, well, be poured over it? Yes, yes, cried Reepicheep, clapping his paws together. That's how I've always imagined it. The world like a great round table, and the waters of all the oceans endlessly pouring over the edge. The ship will tip up, stand on her head. For one moment we shall see over the edge, and then down, down, the rush, the speed. And what do you think will be waiting for us at the bottom? Aslan's country, perhaps? Or perhaps there isn't any bottom. Perhaps it goes down forever and ever. I'm just like screaming in terror, right? And Reepicheep's like, enjoying the drop. Oh my gosh. Terrifying as it comes down. And that's when we find out that, wait a minute, our world isn't flat, our world is round. Do you mean to say, said Caspian, that you three come from a round world, round like a ball, and you've never told me? It's really too bad for you, right? We said before, we've got fairy tales where people go to round worlds. And that last line, Edmund, and it's Edmund that says it, not Eustace. Well, there's nothing particularly exciting about a round world when you're there. Right? I really do think one of the roles of art in general is you help us to see the world afresh, as if for the first time. Especially if you're more of what you would call a romantic artist. For instance, right, we've all seen sunflowers, but we've never really seen a sunflower till we've seen a painting by Van Gogh, right? It's like when you look at a Van Gogh sunflower, it's as if you're seeing it fresh for the first time. Like I've never seen it before.
I remember being
experiencing it.
in school, like my sophomore year of college, and there was a senior in the painting studio, and I met her but never really had any kind of friendship with her, and I knew that everyone was intimidated by her, and I never understood why. And then one day she was carrying this 6 foot long, 2 foot tall painting. It was like this large panoramic, but it was a field of sunflowers.
Oh, nice.
It was painted so thick and so gestural, but the colors were like a Monet.
Oh, okay.
There's so much depth and movement in the color, and she walked by, and I just remember feeling like a little feeble child.
That's all.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. But I didn't ever like sunflowers. Like, I never thought they were pretty. I never liked them. When I saw that painting of them, I was like, oh my God, sunflowers are beautiful.
Wow. Did that make you want to be an artist?
That was the moment that changed my mind about sunflowers. And
Wow.
All these years later in college, and this girl's walking by with this huge painting, but I just was shocked at her view of sunflowers, right? Just, like you said, afresh. I was just like, just stunned.
Just like you never see a Starry Night the same after you see Starry Night. And suddenly it's different, it's deeper, it's richer, it's speaking to you.
Yeah, the next day I was like in her studio asking her a billion questions.
Oh, that's good. How did she do it? And if you're lucky enough to go see, Van Gogh's close up, and some of them you can see how thick his brushstrokes are and stuff like that. It's pretty amazing, swirling around and all that. Put out with a putty knife, wild. But that's it. The romantics called it the need to rip away the veil of familiarity. Now that's kind of like an oxymoron, right? Usually, if you're ripping away a veil, it's a veil of mystery. But the veil of familiarity is we see something so often that we no longer see it. Right? We have lost the appreciation of our wife's beauty, let's say, right? Where we just don't notice it anymore. There's a magic there, and we've got, and this is what I like about, well, do you remember when you were a kid? We talked about this before? And every time you see the moon, you're excited. It's like something new, right? That's what Narnia does for us. That's what great art does, I think. Of course, there are some art that actually makes the world look horrible, but generally speaking, there are cynical artists, just like there are cynical, anything, cynical musicians or novelists or anything. But oftentimes, Lewis used the phrase of baptizing our imagination. It baptizes our eyes so we see it again, as if for the first time. You can do it.
Yeah, you can watch this on my studio.
Right.
We'll see things afresh. We'll see things. Okay, now, then we've got the Sea of Lilies, right? And then something amazing happens. It's on page 537. Oh, it's kind of hard. It's the beginning, middle. The chapter at the very end of the world, chapter 16, which is kind of a long chapter. Towards the center of the chapter, they're already, they see the Sea of Lilies, which is a beautiful concept, right? Lilies only grow in shallow ponds. You don't have lilies when it's super deep. So again, these are magical lilies. They're blooming lilies. And then Caspian says, okay, everybody, I'm leaving now with Reepicheep. We're going to the end of the world. You go back and help Trumpkin. And he said, whoa, 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 whoa. Sire, interrupted Drinian, are you abdicating? Are you giving up the crown? I am going with Reepicheep to see the world's end, said Caspian. A low murmur of dismay. He goes on. Caspian, said Edmund suddenly and sternly, you can't do this. Most certainly, said Reepicheep. His Majesty cannot. No, indeed, said Drinian. Can't? Said Caspian sharply, looking for a moment not unlike his Uncle Miraz. Watch out, okay? Remember, we become our father or mother unless we're careful. Okay, now hopefully our parents have good things about them, but if they have bad things about them, we will become that if we're not careful. Right? And he, again, for a second, the tyrant comes through, begging your Majesty's pardon, but if one of us did the same, it would be called deserting. You presume too much on your long service. No, sire, he's perfectly right. By the Maid of Aslan! I had thought you were all my subjects here, not my schoolmates. Who are you to take? Suddenly, it's a little bit like the gold fever, but now it's a little bit different. I'm not, said Edmund. I'm not your subject. Right? And I say you cannot do this. Can't again? What do you mean? If it please your Majesty, we mean shall not. You are the king of Narnia. You break faith with all your subjects, and especially with Trumpkin, if you do not return. You shall not please yourself with adventures as if you were a private person. Lewis helps to remind us of the duty of a king. Being a king doesn't mean you can do anything you want. Being a king means you have a duty and you can't abandon your ship, whatever you want to say. You can't abandon that duty. Lots of old movies are about, princes not being able to marry the person they really love because they're obliged to do a royal wedding, that kind of stuff, right? You have a certain duty and you can't abdicate it. That's what it means to be a king. Often Americans, especially, we only think of kings in negative senses of people that steal everything from you. But here, a king has a duty. You can't do this as if you were a private person. Anybody ever see the great movie, The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn? Nobody's ever seen that. Well, you know the basic Robin Hood story. And at the end, King Richard has come back, but he's disguised as a monk. And Richard the Lionhearted, is talking to Robin Hood. Robin Hood is explaining what's going on and all the bad things Prince John is doing. And he says, so, you blame Prince John? He says, no, I blame Richard. What do you mean you blame Richard? I blame Richard because he had no business running off with the Crusades. His job is to rule England, and so it's his fault for abdicating. And afterwards, he tells him who he is and says, well, maybe you're right. Okay, this is my job. You can't just get up and leave. You're not a civilian. You have to stick to your post. Let's put it in military language. And if your Majesty will not hear reason, it will be the truest loyalty of every man on board to follow me in disarming and binding you till you come to your senses. Quite right, like they did with Ulysses. We actually hear his name when he wanted to go near the Sirens. Remember that story? How was it that Ulysses got to hear the Sirens and live?
They tied him to the mast.
Good, tied him to the mast, and what did all of his men do?
They covered the ears.
Good. They literally put wax in their ears, right, so they couldn't hear. And so he's trying to get out. Great stuff. Again, he's upset. And he says, Caspian, and then I love Lucy. She tries to mediate. Lucy said, and you've almost promised Ramanu's daughter to go back. Remember that pretty girl? It's waiting for you. So Lucy uses a little psychology there. Caspian paused. Well, yes, there is that. All right, have it your way. The quest is ended. We all return. Get the boat up again. Sire, we do not all return. As I explained before, silence! I've been lessoned, but I'll not be baited. Will no one silence that mouth? The mouse. He's being spoiled brat. And he says, Your Majesty promised to be a good lord to the talking beasts of Narnia. Talking beasts, yes. I said nothing about beasts that never stop talking. It's one of my favorite lines. Beast. Paul, did you just look at Clinton? Oh, okay. Looked like you looked at Clinton. Okay. Anyway. I'm going to get you in trouble. See, diversionary tactics. Anyway.
I would have told him that.
That's good. I love it. He says, so off he goes, and he says, that's it, we're all leaving. But when he comes back, He's changed. And there were tears in his eyes. It's no good. I might as well have behaved decently for all the good I did with my temper and swagger. Aslan has spoken to me. No, I don't mean he was actually here. He wouldn't fit into the cabin for one thing. But that gold lion's head, there's that gold, right, on the wall came to life and spoke to me. It was terrible. His eyes, not that he was at all rough with me, only a bit stern at first. But it was terrible all the same. And he said, I can't bear it. The worst thing he could have said, you're to go on Reap, and Edmund and Lucy and Eustace, and I'm to go back, alone, and at once. And what is the good of anything? Caspian, you knew we'd have to go back to our own world sooner or later. Yes, but this is sooner. You'll feel better when you get back to Ramadu's land. Lucy's reminding him again of that, right? And the king learns that he can't do whatever he wants, right? They move on. They just catch a glimpse of the mountains of Aslan's country. The next book, Silver Chair, is going to start on top of one of the mountains. And what he says is, imagine mountains that are 100 times taller than the Alps. But if there was a mountain that high in the earth, it would be encrusted with ice and dead forever. But this is warm and green and living as far up as you go. And, as you remember, it brings a sound and a smell, everything coming to you, right? And then they come to the wave. This is awesome, right? This sort of frozen wave. And now Reepicheep knows it's time for him to leave. On page 539, they did not even try to stop him, because now it's just Eustace and Lucy and Edmund and Reepicheep. And Reepicheep gets off, he gets in his little coracle, that's a word for a boat, that little boat that he found. And look how it's described. For everything now felt as if it had been fated or had happened before. Oh, it's like a dream. They helped him, Reepicheep, to lower his little coracle. Then he took off his sword. I shall need it no more, he said, and flung it far away across the lilied sea. Where it fell, it stood upright with the hilt above the surface. Anybody get the reference there? What's the most famous sword in literature? Excalibur, right? And after Arthur dies, he tells Bedivere, his last knight, to throw the sword. And he throws the sword, and you know what happens? Up comes a hand clad in white samite. It's the hand of the Lady of the Lake, and she grabs the sword, and she wields it, and takes it back down into the lake. Right? And there it remains until who returns? Until we need him again, and King Arthur will return, and that's why he's called the once and future king. And Lewis says somewhere, and the sooner he comes back, the better. He says. We're waiting for it, right? Then he bade them goodbye, trying to be sad for their sakes, but he was quivering with happiness. Lucy, for the first and last time, did what she had always wanted to do, taking him in her arms and caressing him, right? Did you want to do that, Amanda, when you were little? Give little Reepicheep a hug, and she's been waiting all this time, right? He gives up, and then he gets on it, and his little coracle goes up the wave, but there were no lilies on the wave, and up to the top, and he disappeared. And it can be truly said that no one ever saw Reepicheep again. But I believe that he made it to Aslan's country and is still alive there today. Wonderful. And then finally, the end of the book, last couple pages, they come on to the very end of the world, right? They come there, and there's sort of grass, and then there's sand, and they see a lamb, even brighter than the sun, right? And what's the link between Jesus and the lamb? He's the Lamb of God, right? The lamb that was slain, right? And they come, and he's cooking some. Okay, look, we're on page 540, right at the end. It says, "They saw the lamb. Come and have breakfast," said the lamb in his sweet, milky voice. They noticed for the first time that there was a fire lit on the grass and fish roasting on it. They sat down and ate the fish, hungry now for the first time for many days, and it was the most delicious food they had ever tasted. Does anybody know where that happens in the Bible? Along the shore? Do you know? What's that?
Well, it's in every gospel.
Well, but something specifically happens in the Gospel of John. Remember?
Oh, it's the Gospel of John.
Remember?
Whenever Peter comes on shore and Jesus has breakfast.
Good. Now, what you're thinking about before is in all the other Gospels, that when Peter is called the first time, right, there's the fish. But in John, the very last chapter, I think it's 21, yeah, he comes on shore, Peter dives in, and when he comes there, Jesus is on the shore, and what's he doing?
He's cooking.
Yeah, he's cooking like roasting fish, and they eat it. So it's really cool. I
What's
mean,
interesting about that little bit of scripture
Uh-huh.
is the word for coal.
Oh.
The fire that he was, the Greek word for coal, is only used there, and when Peter was warming his hands in the fire.
oh, interesting. I didn't know that one.
Jesus.
Oh, that's cool. And remember, during that discussion with Jesus and Peter, what does Jesus ask Peter?
Do you love me?
Do you love me? And how many times does he ask him? 3 times. So that's cool. I like that. I'm going to use that. I didn't know that. So look at my Greek New Testament, see if I can find that. That's cool. Because it is. He's making up for the 3 things. She's pretty deep. See?
Deep on the cover.
That guy's great. Anyway, now watch this. It says, please, Liam, is this the way to Aslan's country? Not for you. For you, the door into Aslan's country is from your own world. What? Is there a way into Aslan's country from our world too? There is a way into my country from all the world, said the lamb. But as he spoke, his snowy white flushed into tawny gold, and his size changed, and he was Aslan himself, towering above them and scattering light from his mane. It's like he is the sun now, his gold tawny hide, and the lamb becomes the lion. Powerful imagery, right? Oh, Aslan, will you tell us how to get into your country from our world? I shall be telling you all the time, but I will not tell you how long or short the way will be, only that it lies across a river. But do not fear that, for I am the great bridge builder. You know how you say bridge builder? That word is pontiff, which is one of the titles of the Pope. Pontifex Maximus means the great bridge builder, right? The vicar, right? Between the two. So, and by the way, what is that river we have to cross? What? Well, death, but it's always, it's depicted as what? Especially in the old spirituals. You know, the old...
Jordan.
It's the River Jordan, right? Crossing the River Jordan means you die. At the end of Pilgrim's Progress, he has to go through River Jordan to get to the Celestial City, right? So the River Jordan, you're crossing over, not into the Promised Land, because Joshua led the children of Israel over the River Jordan into the Promised Land, right? Jericho. But in the end, Joshua, whose name is the same as Jesus, leads us across, right? The River of Jordan, which is death, into the real Promised Land, which is heaven, right? Which is really cool. And so I am the great bridge builder. But here's the point, that there is a way to Aslan's country. Very well. And then he says, please, Aslan, before we go, when can we come back? You will not be returning, right? You need to become part of your own world. And Lucy says, well, you don't understand. It's not the world. It's not Narnia. It's you. How will we live without seeing you? And then this amazing moment, but you will see me there, child. You mean you're in our world too? I am, right? Which is the name of God, Yahweh. I am, but there I go by a different name. Then he tells him the important part. It was for that very reason you were brought to Narnia, so that by knowing me here a little, you might know me better there. And you might remember the first lecture I said that Lewis said, don't feel like you've got to tell your little kids all the links to Christ. Let them learn to love Aslan, feel a certain way, and then when the time is right, they can take those feelings and turn them over to their right object, basically, right? So they can say, I don't know what it means, but the spell of it has been on me all my life. That's what Weeping Chief said in the beginning, until he finds out and comes in there, right? And so that, in a way, that's the whole point of Narnia. So they can understand something about that. And is Eustace never to come back here either? Child, do you really need to know that? Amanda, you seem to know John 21. Do you remember how John 21, after Jesus says to Peter, yea, when you were young, you clothed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will be clothed by another and made to go where you do not want to go. And that's when he prophesied his death. And then what did Peter say to Jesus? He pointed to John and said, what about him? And Jesus said, what if it is my will that he remain till I return? What do I want you to do? 2 words, follow me. Right? You follow me. And that's why a rumor sprang up that John would never die. But it's like, that's not what Jesus said. He said, what if I don't want, wait a minute. But again, that wonderful thing. And so they go back to, and the movie does this beautifully, by the way. If you see the movie, that whole last scene is really well done. I was afraid they'd leave it out, but they really do it well. And they walk through it, and they're right back to Eustace's place, right, where the picture was. And look at how it ends. It says, only 2 more things need to be told, right? They went back, Caspian married Ramandu's daughter. She became a great queen, the mother and grandmother of great kings. The other is, back in their own world, everyone said how Eustace had improved and how you'd never know him for the same boy. Everyone except Aunt Alberta, his mother, who said he had become very commonplace and tiresome, and it must have been the influence of those Pevensey children. And notice that word influence comes at the end. That's the whole concept of the Michael Ward idea of Planet Narnia. The influence, the solar influence, made him a better person. But the mother doesn't like him because now he's ordinary. Just ordinary. So, wow. So anyway, you guys are thinking through your projects for next week?
Yes.
Be good stuff. Be good stuff. You think are we going to get another helmet? Does Anthony usually do helmets or will he do something different?